So I was looking over the EADA
Sure.
data for this story. Before I get into what the previous years showed,
Sure.
2017 obviously isn't going to be out for a while.
Right.
Do you have any indication about what it might show?
Yeah, we should be relatively flat. Relatively
Okay.
flat. Again, I think getting into the past, we had a couple experiences that led to the changes you saw over the 3 fiscal years. One being NCAA tournament play, so just your season's longer, your travel expenses are going to go up because you have 2 additional trips in there, a leg in, a leg out. Our international trip, which was completely donor funded but not inexpensive, but just from terms of reporting, it's reported in there. And then some equipment, our performance-based equipment, Catapult Sports, where we took in the 1 fiscal year where we used at a accelerated rate than we have in the past. So I expect it to be flat, just about flat.
Yeah, so in terms of these international trips, it's donor funded, but you still have to report.
Yeah, you report it every way. So donor funds would be reported would be reflected in the revenues piece of the EAD, and then the expenses, because of the definitions for expenses, the expenses would be reported in the program as part of operating and game day expenses. Because I think if you see in the definition there, it says any home, away, or neutral site event, that in effect, that type of trip would be considered a neutral site opportunity.
So in terms of the expenses, a lot of it isn't necessarily a conscious decision to spend more. It's just fluctuating.
It's it's a realization of a schedule, a strategic opportunity. The way we've allocated expenses in the past, we've not fully allocated rent to the men's basketball operating expense line. So just in terms of transparency around the full cost of operating our program, we now allocate that lease, the rent payments as part of expenses. So no conscious need to say, hey, we need to spend more. We don't do that anyway. I mean, we provide what we think our programs need to be successful based on the expectations we hold for them. So.
Yeah, with the preseason tournaments, I know like some are in New York.
Yeah, it could fluctuate. Yeah, that type of fluctuation.
Yeah, how much is that factored into deciding whether or not to play it?
It's always a factor. I mean, our budgets are our budgets, and in athletics, we've not seen an increase for operating budgets over the last 3 fiscal years, so budgets are flat. Within scheduling, they cycle. I mean, as you see in our schedule, we could play home 1 year, away and next. That's going to change expense, but the expense is going to be flat. Relative to men's basketball and women's basketball, we're always going to look to fund the opportunities that we think best position our program to do what it is we expect them to do in any given year. So those neutral site opportunities you've seen are incredibly important for getting quality games.
Yeah. And have you kind of sensed an increase in interest in Marquette in these neutral site opportunities that's tied with actually going there? Like, do these trips help you make money at all?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the short answer is probably no. The long answer is sure. You have an opportunity to improve your resume. You have an opportunity to garner quality wins. Certainly that happens in the postseason, but then you also have an opportunity to engage alums in an area of the country that you may not get to, or for an opportunity like Maui, alums will travel, and you have opportunities to engage them around our programs in ways that it's hard to quantify in the short term, but through experience those things pay dividends.
Yeah, when I first saw game day expenses and I didn't really kind of get the definition of it, my first thought was, the amount of staff at the Bradley Center.
Yeah, no, that would all be, any of that is captured in the rent payment we make, but now the rent payment itself would be allocated as an expense against men's basketball in there. So we reconcile on a quarterly basis with the Bradley Center. So those costs, when captured by the institution, are allocated to men's basketball, and then when we report out to the NCAA via EADA, those costs would be replicated there.
Sure. I noticed that revenues have increased the last couple of years, like even including the first year with Wojo when this program was kind of in a down cycle. Revenues increased that year. Why is that?
Yeah, Marquette fans are passionate, so we've been fortunate to grow, although our season ticket base has not grown at the same rate, and it actually declined a little bit from 12-13 to 13-14, just based on previous year's performance. You have that natural attrition.
Like a big drop in that.
Natural attrition, correct. Revenue has grown. Now that's pricing on some level. A little bit of his pricing increases, but it's also we're regrowing the base. Donations continue to be steady and strong. Men's Basketball Excellence Fund continues to grow. People that are most passionate about our program continue to provide opportunity for it to do the things it needs to do strategically. So in a given year, just like you would see an expense for that international trip, like I said earlier, you would see a revenue that basically offsets it. So there could be a revenue growth in that year. So if you saw a little dip year to year, it's because we were focused in a 2-year period to close the gap on that trip so we could afford that opportunity. And then conference distributions, we're still reaping the benefits in terms of units and historical units from the old Big East. And then NCAA tournament play, there's performance-based bonuses that you earn through the Big East Conference that could change just your budgeted revenue on a year-to-year basis.
I was actually going to ask about media rights for the new Big East and like how that factors in. But before that, you're still earning money from the old Big East.
Yeah, no, there's NCAA performance bonuses that we still earn from the old Big East. From that the 7 programs that left were able to keep the units they earned, and those were paid over a 6-year cycle, just like their NCAA performance based, so similar 6-year cycle.
So basically, the NCAA tournament that you made like 2012,
correct?
Something like that.
We're still feeling, we're still receiving those payments. Those payments traveled with us into the new league.
Is there any way to determine how much those are?
Yeah, I mean it's budgeted. I'd have to look. I don't know enough but they'll sunset after the next. I think we have 1 more year of payment on those.
Okay.
So
when you report these revenues, is the media rights from the new Big East, is that involved?
Conference so all revenues at the Big East for the Big East Conference are pooled. 75% of those are shared. 75% of those after expenses are shared equally with the 10 schools, and then 25% are based on performance, and it could be anything from athletic to academic. There's an APR bonus. Obviously, men's and women's basketball have the greatest opportunity to earn performance bonuses as the priority programs for the conference.
Yeah, I was doing some rough calculations myself without knowing any
Sure.
of this. I think it's 12 years, 500 mil. Is that the?
Yeah, that's the reported
I was
number.
kind of dividing it out, and it came.
It's not that clean.
Yeah, no, I know it's not
clean.
nearly that clean, but I know dividing it out, it came out to roughly 4 mil.
Yeah,
per
that's high.
And
that's
I know
high.
that's high.
So you have to remember, you have to resolve. You have cash reserves that the league would hold. The league has its own expenses for operations. 75% of that is pooled, but it's not insignificant. Again, if you go all the way back to when the league formed and evolved, the reason why we were able to, one of the primary concerns with the 7 schools that departed, our 7 schools that formed this league now, when we departed, was retaining the value that we know existed in the Big East Conference. And Fox saw the value in what we were doing. We believe it's been justified over the next 4 years, and they made it fiscally possible for the league to form, and now the league's really flourishing.
Yeah. Can you release how much a school might earn?
We wouldn't, but I would say it's not. It's consistent with what we were earning in the most successful periods of our short stay in the Big East
if you were to
tournament,
if
Big
you were
East
to
Conference.
Ballpark it, we're talking high 6 figures, low 7 figures. Is that an adequate range, or are you not allowed to release it?
I would say it's significant.
Okay.
It allows us to run the program in the way we think it needs to be run to be successful.
Sure.
And it was that was important when we made the decision to move.
Okay. As I was looking at the EADA spreadsheet, I kept on seeing this column that says not allocated, and the cost would vary wildly.
Yeah, it's unallocated expense that you wouldn't attribute to a program
Okay.
or a scholarship. So it could be general administration, it could be sports medicine, it could be athletic training. It's a catch-all that's not specifically allocated for one of the defined categories in the EADA, and that's the fluctuation from even year to year or university to university. Everybody allocates expenses differently, and that's why the one thing with the EADA is, as helpful as it is, I look at it as a bracketing tool. Mm-hmm. You can get a good feel for a range of schools, but and they've done a better job over the years of defining some of the expense and revenue lines in there, but it's still not an apples to apples comparison.
What happens to all of the leftover profit that men's basketball or any other program
Funds every other program we
So
have.
it's in a pool, and then it
Men's basketball is the only revenue-producing sport, net profit revenue-producing sport we have.
Okay. Now, so even women's basketball or men's lacrosse or something?
I mean, they produce revenue, but they produce no net profit.
Okay. So what that means is they'll produce a good amount of change, but it'll go back into how the program is being run, so there's nothing left over.
Correct. There's no surplus running off those programs.
Sure. And now I want to ask a little bit about the Blue and Gold Fund.
Sure. I'll do my best to answer those questions, too.
Yeah, sure. Now, would you describe the state of that as pretty healthy?
Yeah, healthy. We're actually fortunate. I mean, when you look at our space, 1 AAA, we are probably in the 95th percentile in terms of funding, the amount of donor support we receive to fund the athletic scholarships we provide. So our donors and benefactors have been incredibly generous, and they really understand what they're providing, and they recognize programs win and they win and they lose year to year. Sometimes there's fluctuations. You hit really great periods, you hit rebuilding years, but what they've committed to is making sure that a student athlete who wants to have the experience at Marquette University, they're going to have that experience because they've made that gift and they're making those funds available so we can provide that opportunity to them.
Obviously, men's basketball is going to drive a lot of enthusiasm,
Sure.
But have you found that other sports, like, say, women's basketball or women's volleyball, are getting the support from the alumni? Like, are they motivated to give?
Yeah, I've been here 15 years, and I think that, and we've had a fair amount of success around a number of programs. I think what joining the Big East back in 2005 did was really raise a level of awareness of the success of the non-basketball programs. So, Marcus and his women's soccer program is arguably the most successful program we've had over the last 25 years, and they've played varying levels of competition. But I think what helped them in terms of that particular question is now they were competing in the Big East Conference against known brands and known soccer powers, so to speak, Notre Dame and Louisville and Connecticut, and competing successfully. So what I know Marquette people are passionate about is excellence in anything that we do. And so that level of excellence that these programs we're having to do it against another level of competition really brought awareness to those programs. And volleyball, you think about it, we moved to a tough volleyball conference, but we actually raised the level of our volleyball program through that, and that attracted donor support and interest and fan support, and now we have one of the 2 preeminent programs in the Big East Conference. So it's been a good period of time for our programs, and they're in support of those programs.
Yeah, just 2 or 3 more questions for you.
Sure.
When I look at, say, the cost column in that spreadsheet, about what's the rough in the EADA, what's the rough breakdown and where that money's coming from? Because I know students, like, they'll hear that money and they're going to say, oh, athletics is taking our students.
Yeah, I mean, there's only we're not fully funded. We're not a self-funding operation. There's only 24 of 356 programs that are self-funding. So we rely on the university to fund a portion of our base budget. Now, that being said, we're in the top quartile of 1 AAAs in terms of self-funding. So, I mean, we do an incredibly good job of providing a significant base for ourselves, but ultimately the university has to help us too.
About how much does the university have to
Oh,
help?
I wouldn't disclose the amount, but I would just tell you amongst our peers, the universities does it at a rate lower than the majority in our space. And even in the Big East Conference. In the Big East Conference, we're in the top 2 in terms of self-funding for our department.
Yeah. Could you give me an idea of what would be a normal percentage for a university to fund at this level?
Oh, a 1 AAA?
Yeah.
70%.
70%.
What the university funds.
Yeah. Yeah. Because
we're nowhere close to that.
Okay.
Nowhere close.
Yeah. Are you?
I wouldn't.
allowed to give?
I would
Okay.
not. No.
Yeah. And then last question: is there anything that you would want people to know about the athletics finances?
Yeah, I just want people to know again, and it's we're not naive to what perception is, but the reality is I think we're amazing stewards of our resources. We're incredibly thoughtful and grateful. We're incredibly grateful for how the university supports supports our programs and how the community supports our programs, and know that any expense, small or large, we look at thoughtfully, we think about strategically, and we believe that those decisions that we make around those are solely focused on providing our kids the experience that we've promised them we would provide.